Hi. All right, good afternoon. We're going to start the 2 o'clock session. It's Experienced Patients, What's New for You? And I get the privilege to introduce Dr. Peter Merkel. He's the Chief of and Division of Rheumatology, Professor of Medicine and Epidemiology at the University of Pennsylvania in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Dr. Merkel is the Principal Investigator of the Vasculitis Clinical Research Consortium and the co-principal investigator of the VPPRN. He is an internationally recognized leader in clinical research and care in vasculitis and the principal investigator on multiple NIH, FDA, and PCORI research grants that focus on clinical and transitional investigation in vasculitis. And the greatest thing I can say about Dr. Merkel is I'm pleased to have him as my personal doctor. Dr. Merkel.
How many people here have been to a symposium before? Oh boy, you're very experienced. How many people have not? That was easier. Wait, you can't vote for both. So maybe you were here and you kind of tuned out, or maybe you like, okay, well, there we go. So that's good, because at least some of you have not heard my old jokes, so that'll be great. I have the privilege of been working with the Vasculitis Foundation really since I started working as a rheumatologist, because I started working vasculitis from the get-go. And I got to tell you, it's a great pleasure to work with the Vasculitis Foundation. I feel I am the Vasculitis Foundation. You are the Vasculitis Foundation. We're all part of it. And I think it's very important to have sort of that approach as we support this group that supports you and supports us and all of that. So I agree with Dr. Gordon said earlier, which is be part of things to your ability and your time, et cetera, and whatever phase of life you're in. I am delighted to talk to you as experienced patients. What's new for you? And there'll be more of what's new, because on Sunday, if you stay till the end, I will speak again on what happened at our workshop and some of the new things that have come about scientifically. But there are some big things. I think there's a sense that things could happen, are they happening quickly? I can tell you that they're happening from a vasculitis research standpoint incredibly quickly. From your standpoint, not fast enough. But you have to have a little perspective, and I can tell you, and I'll show you some of that today. I should tell you that I have disclosures. We're not required for this, but I think you should know I work with many different companies to advise them and partner with them to think about developing drugs in vasculitis, also in scleroderma, another disease I study, but mostly vasculitis. And I take money from all sorts of governments, but not Russia. And in order to do work in vasculitis. And I write about it as well. So I do this because we want to develop these drugs. And that has been successful. You'll see this slide a lot probably over the weekend. We're almost required to show it. This is sort of the spread of the different vasculitis names. This is from our Chapel Hill Consensus Conference. I was part of this, as were several other speakers. As we came up with definitions for these diseases, this is our main figure. I actually added the one up in the upper left, this part, just because there were some other things. It doesn't list everything, we'll stop that. And this is how we think about vasculitis. Your type probably is up here. There are a few others that are scattered about, or maybe you don't have a defined type. But this tells you that we're beginning to think about spreading them around. You're going to see these names a lot as we think about these, and I'll use this as a reference. But there is more research being done in vasculitis now than at any point in history. And I'm happy to say that I've said that before, and it's true again. And it's sort of remarkable. I mean, it's even more than in 2017, when I also gave a similar talk. And that is remarkable. There are more people studying. There aren't necessarily more people with vasculitis, thankfully, although there are more humans in the world. There are probably more people being diagnosed, thankfully, because we're not missing it, and that's good. And there are more people hopefully getting access to health care around the world that aren't always. Although there may be struggles here, you have no idea what it can be like in some countries with almost no access. But there are more people studying it, there are more money going into it, and I think that's only good for you and us, and as we try to treat and eradicate these diseases. Let's talk about microscopic polyangiitis and granulomatosis with polyangiitis. If you do this long enough, you could talk about it really fast. You could talk about those words really fast. Nobody understands what you're saying. So I have been told perhaps I should slow down sometimes. So I'll be talking about MPA and GPA, the two forms of ANCA-associated vasculitis that we often group together. in our treatments. We're beginning to think separately. We're also beginning to think PR3 versus MPO. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, you probably don't have one of these two diseases. But they're antibodies that tell us things. But we still study them together. And the evolution of clinical trials, this continues to be a story that we add to. And I keep coming back to this because I work really hard on the slide and because the story is very important for you to understand where we have been and how fast we're going new places. So this is about, first they report, oh, I treated one patient with this, I treated a few patients with this, and then you evolve into these randomized trials, which is how you get very, very good level evidence to decide if a drug works or not, and the FDA and the EMA and Health Canada decide that they're going to approve a drug. So if you go back to the very first case reports of using cyclophosphamide by Stu Novak, Howard Pearson in 1971, that was just 4 cases that were reported of cyclophosphamide, also known as Cytoxan. Then Dr. Fauci really began a big program at the National Institutes of Health, really showed you can use this chemotherapeutic drug to treat an autoimmune disease which people thought was crazy. And what he did is he turned a disease that was very likely to actually kill people into a disease that did not. And people lived, and they went on and did much better. There were complications with the therapy. We used it a lot. And then Dr. Hoffman, who was a very important part of our community, still is. He's retired. Actually, I got an email from him about 12 minutes ago. And he also thinks fondly of the Vasculitis Foundation. He then did some work with Fauci as well. But you'll notice there's a 20-year gap. A 20-year gap between sort of treatment cyclophosphamide and then thinking about methotrexate. I think that's a little slow to go 20 years between drugs. Then there were these drugs using antibiotics, and then there was these IV versus oral cyclophosphamide, lots and lots of that. And then there was this big trial that our European colleagues did, looking at cyclophosphamide versus azathioprine, Imuran, for maintenance of remission. That was a very important trial because it showed you could do things after cyclophosphamide that weren't quite as harsh and still did well, and it showed the world that these crazy investigators who do work in vasculitis can work together and do stuff. And then there were a couple of other trials that helped define the therapy, all of which were very important. And then we did our etanercept trial. This was different because we got money from the NIH and from the FDA, and this trial was profoundly negative. There was no benefit to the drug, but it has been profoundly important because it showed that we can do this in the United States, we can get together and do trials, and we got a lot of other papers, a lot of other science out of it. But we said, okay, that drug doesn't work, we'll go on. And we went on. And then many other trials were done in France and in Europe, and then we did our big RAVE study of rituximab. And I'm happy to be part of that. Dr. Specs helped lead that, I don't know if he's here. And we did that in 8 centers in the US and 1 in the Netherlands. And that was also partially funded by a company, by NIH, all sorts of people. And that led to the drug being approved, the first ever drug approved for any form of vasculitis. We now have 3, which may not sound like a lot, but 3 is infinitely more than 0, and it's been quite good. And that has changed things. We then had these other studies also on rituximab by our French colleagues that helped define things importantly, and then more studies that helped define or helped say things may not work as well. And notice the years are getting closer together. And now we just published, Jen and I just published a trial of belimumab showing some, maybe it doesn't work, but it's interesting scientifically. And now, look what's going on. These are all trials that are either just completed or are ongoing now. They include investigator-initiated studies, and I have the privilege of running several of these, or industry-sponsored studies, and I'll tell you a little about those as well. So what's amazing is look at all what's going on in ANCA-associated vasculitis. And now, all these trials, learning to treat better and better. And I think you should be happy about that as you learn about these trials. There's some of them are about, a lot of them are about replacing prednisone. All right, here's an easy, how many people love prednisone? Okay, some people do. How many people hate prednisone? Okay, as I like to say, it's the best drug we have, it's the worst drug we have. And so that's exactly right. Someone's like, yeah, some days you like it, some days you hate it. More days you hate it. So this is what's happening now. A tremendous amount of research being done in new treatments, and I think you should be very pleased about that. But what's really new in AAV? How about getting rid of steroids? Would that be good? Okay. So we're working on it. So this trial, the Pexavas trial, you've been hearing about for a long time. Trust me, you have not been thinking about it as long as I have. So Drs. Walsh, Shane, and I have been working on this. As I like to say, how long have we been working on this? Well, Dr. Walsh was just finishing up his training, and he was our third guy, and he just got married when we started this trial, and he has now 5 children, no twins, and a very patient wife. And so this has taken us 9 or 10 years now to get done. This is a major trial that was looking at, and these are all the people that are involved. Actually, it's nowhere near all the people involved, people who are authors. This was our trial of plasma exchange. Plasmapheresis, which is where you take the blood, and you take people's blood, you take it out, and you sort of skim off the antibodies, and then you put the blood back in. If it sounds primitive, it's because exactly what had happened. It goes into a machine, you take off the antibodies, you put your blood back in. And prednisone, in addition to regular therapy. And why did we do this? Because this is still a bad disease. And you're all here, thankfully, who have it, but there are some of our patients who don't make it. And so the mortality, death rate is still high early in the disease. And worse is our patients get infections. And that is actually the biggest problem now in these diseases. Infection, infection, infection is a big problem, and we think prednisone is a big part of that. So we need safer, more effective therapies. We need to get people to remission faster. So we said plasma exchange. There was no clear understanding if it works or not. It does take off antibodies, low adverse events, but it's very controversial and it's fairly expensive to do. There's no controversy about steroids. They work. But can we go to lower doses? Can we give lower doses and still have it work, but have fewer infections? And I'm going to ask that we not take pictures of or tweet out these results because they actually aren't published yet. But I'm going to show you some of them anyway. There's no accepted standard of care. Nobody knows exactly what to do with all of these things. So we had 2 questions. In severe ANCA-associated vasculitis, does plasma exchange reduce death from any cause or end-stage renal disease, meaning you will go on dialysis? So those are big outcomes. Can you keep people alive and off dialysis? And will the lower doses of prednisone work just as well, but not cause as many infections? So in order to do that, we had to get 700 patients in multiple centers, close to 100 centers around the world, and it took 9 years to do. Everybody got standard of care, either cyclophosphamide or rituximab. Everybody got some IV, and then they got plasma exchange, which is called plasmapheresis, or they didn't. That's very simple, right? You got it or you didn't get it. In addition, you either got regular dose prednisone or you got a reduced dose of prednisone. And we did that for everybody, and so we ended up with 4 groups. Pheresis, low dose, pheresis, regular dose, no pheresis, low dose, no pheresis. It's a complicated design called a factorial design. And then we said we followed people for years and years and see what happens. This way we can compare the amber color to green, exchange or no exchange. We can also compare the yellow to the blue. We put the reduced doses together and the regular doses. And so we get 2 trials in one, and that's the magic of this. This is what we did. So let's say you're between 50 and 75 kilograms, which is generally average size patient. And on the left is what you would get for prednisone, and on the right is what you get if you get the reduced dose. And you can see by, for example, by here at week, even before 2 months, you're already on half as much. Doesn't that sound good? That's a lot less. So the first 2 weeks are kind of the same, and then boom, you go down. This is another way to look at it. The dotted line is the reduced dose. So can we get people down to those much less crazy-making doses, and I mean crazy-making, doses of prednisone sooner? So what happened? Well, we enrolled 704 patients in 5 continents across the world, and here's what happened with plasma exchange. I won't get into so people who had no plasma exchange, 31% of them either did not live or ended up in renal failure. They had a lot of kidney disease here. versus 28% in the people who got plasma exchange. There was no difference. No difference in this therapy we've been using for years and years. Is there something early? Are there subgroups? That's coming out later as we analyze it. But no benefit even at 1 year or at several years. So that is important. What about the steroid stuff? Again, no difference. The people who got almost half as much did just as well as the people who got the full dose. And the people who got the reduced dose had fewer serious infections. So, what do we think? In patients with severe disease, plasma exchange does not seem to reduce the combination of death and renal failure. And I know these are pretty serious outcomes. And the reduced dose of steroids was non-inferior, so it was just as good, or non-inferior, to the standard dose. We think these are big wins. We're working towards getting that published, and it'll be out there. I think, I'm biased, I helped run the study, obviously I'm biased, but this will probably change how we practice this medicine. I think people are going to get much less steroids as a result of this, for this disease, and they were much less likely to get plasma exchange. There still may be a role, but it depends. And so by combining academic centers close to 100 around the world, and working together, and patients volunteering to be part of this very complicated and long study, we've made some significant advances. We had 300 physician investigators, 95 centers. We had funding from all sorts of people all around the world. Another trial that is ongoing is almost over. This study, another study Dr. Jane and I are running, this trial will be done in November 21st, to be precise. We'll have results soon. We're just about to see the last patient, the last visit. Some of you may be in the trial. As a matter of fact, I know some of you are in the trial. And so this is a trial of whether or not you should continue rituximab after rituximab, or if you should use azathioprine, another drug. This is part of a series of trials to understand how do you best treat people when they're doing well. Because when you're doing well, what do you want to do? You want to keep doing well. And so again, this is GPA and MPA. But also, we also had two different choices of steroids. And again, patients could go on a lower dose versus the upper dose. So we're going to be able to compare that again in a somewhat different situation when people are relapsing and having things. So all of this is about safer, lower doses of steroids and keeping people well. I don't have results for this, but we will have it at the end of this year. So what's better than a reduced dose of glucocorticoids? Correct. No dose glucocorticoids. Not to be confused with no dose, which you might feel like you're on when you're on 60 milligrams of prednisone. So I think the camera guy doesn't want me to keep walking around, but that's all right. He's nodding. How you doing? So, got to see my pretty face. So what about no dose? So there's a study with a drug called avacopan, which was formerly had the catchy name of CCX168. Can't imagine why they changed the name. This is a pill. It inhibits a little chemical called complement C5a. It actually interrupts the receptor. And in 176 subjects in 2 different trials, which some of us were part of, it had good safety and it seemed to help patients with vasculitis, ANCA-associated vasculitis. So then when you have good results in your first couple of smaller studies, what do? You do a bigger study. And that's what they're doing now. We're doing something called the Advocate trial. This has the very easy to understand name of a randomized double-blind active controlled phase 3 study to evaluate the safety and efficacy of CCX168 in patients with ANCA-associated vasculitis treated with concomitantly with rituximab, cyclophosphamide, or azathioprine. What that means is, I'll show you in a second, is they're adding the drug and see if it does better than if you don't add the drug. And we're trying to see if this is efficacious without prednisone. So here's the trial design, and it can be, so here on top, so here on the bottom is, this is actually not, this is correct, okay. So here on the bottom is what you normally would get, either rituximab or cyclophosphamide, plus all this blue diamond, that's months and months of prednisone, okay? And you get the placebo, so you don't get the active drug. So you get what you normally would get. Those patients are getting standard of care, rituximab or cyclophosphamide plus prednisone. On top, if they get randomized, these patients are getting rituximab or cyclophosphamide, plus the study drug, and no more prednisone after the first week or two when they came in. No more. And the outcome is, how do they do at 12 months? It's complicated, but that's what we're studying. These results will be available. This is fully recruited. Several of you have been part of this. These study results will be available almost certainly in the first quarter of 2020, maybe even at the end of 2019. Very, very much eager to know what this shows, to see if this drug works and if this strategy works. Another trial also studying the no prednisone treatment is something called IFX1, another catchy name. This is actually being done in Europe. I'm helping them as well. This is the exchange trial. A lot of people are helping them. And this is another company looking at a similar drug. And so there is a lot of work being done to get our patients off of prednisone. But it's not just about that. It's about getting people in remission quicker and keeping them there. And that's what we're trying to do. So what about, switching to another disease, what about eosinophilic granulomatosis with polyangiitis? EGPA, also known as Church-Strauss syndrome. Well, as of the last workshop, I told you what was about to happen, and then it happened. And so this trial was published, and again, several of us were part of this. This was something called mepolizumab. This is a drug that blocks a chemical called IL-5. Now, you may be saying, what's with all the crazy scientific names? Well, first of all, we like crazy scientific names because we're crazy scientists. And second of all, what these drugs are, these so-called biologics, and even some of the oral drugs, they're trying to be very precise. Rather, cyclophosphamide is like a neutron bomb. Or actually it's more like an atomic bomb, wipes everything out. And then that hopefully will work. But there's a lot of damage. So these drugs are trying to be more precise. Let's get rid of that chemical, or that protein, and that's being more precise. And seeing that you can be more precise, get rid of one or two things, and slow the disease or stop the disease without all this other collateral damage. And this is being happened not just in vasculitis, but in the whole family of autoimmune and inflammatory diseases. Rheumatoid arthritis, multiple sclerosis, lupus, more and more and more of these. It's also being done in cancer in a different way. So this is a targeted therapy, goes after one thing. And this was a trial of patients with mild to moderate EGPA that was annoyingly coming back, and they had to stay on prednisone. People with EGPA are on a lot of prednisone. And there's a lot of asthma and upper airway and various things. And what you can see here is the patients in red, who were in red, that's all the added together, they were in remission, not all the time, but more often and more likely to go than the people who didn't get the drug. And they also, people who got the drug relapsed last here on the right. They were less likely to relapse. They relapsed, but not as often as the people on placebo. And they got into remission more often, which means they got lower prednisone, et cetera. This study alone got the drug approved by the FDA and other agencies around the world for use in this disease. That was very, very important because it ain't cheap, and you need to have drugs approved so your insurance company will approve them. Sometimes we have to write nasty letters, but they will approve it, and if it's appropriate. And this was very important these drugs are very important to get approved. And so this trial really helped us get further along in treating EGPA. This is another study using the same data that we did afterwards, and I should remind you, I work with all these companies to develop these studies. This shows that we did it, this was afterwards, so it's always a little funny to do it, what we call post hoc. We went back and looked. But every way we sliced it, the people who were in the drug, which is the orange, did better than the people in the blue. Not every individual, but as a group. They were more likely to get some benefit. They were more likely to be able to reduce their dose by steroids by at least a half, reduce their prednisone dose by at least a half. And they were more likely not to have relapses during the time of the trial. So this is very encouraging. So this is the first ever drug proven in a randomized trial to be effective in EGPA. It's not a cure, but it's an important option. And it shows the power and potential of these targeted therapies. because we know that this chemical is very high in patients with EGPA. The problem with eosinophilic granulomatosis with meningitis are that they have a lot of eosinophils. That's why they call it EGPA. This chemical helps block the action of the eosinophils. And so if you block the chemical, you help calm down the eosinophils that are making trouble. The FDA approved this drug. This is a major advance and encourages other companies to invest in diseases. Once companies see, oh, look at those guys. They got a drug approved. They're making money. They're making a lot of money. Maybe we should do that too. And it also says, look at those folks over there, those men and women who did the study. They seem to be able to do it. Let's go to them. They seem to be able to get this trial done. So with your help, we get the studies done, and then we show the world, hey, we can actually do this, even though these are weird, rare diseases. And that's important. So we're also doing more work in EGPA. So the Vasculitis Clinical Research Consortium, which I run, and the Vasculitis Patient-Powered Research Network. How many people here are in the Vasculitis Patient-Powered Research Network? Okay. If those of you who did not raise your hand, either I'm sorry that your shoulder hurts, or you should join us. And Kaylin Young, Kaylin in the room? She's probably out working. We have computers here. We have kiosks. You can join. This is an online registry for you to join to participate actively in research. You don't have to do it. It may not be right for you. She can explain it. But we're making it easier and easier. We're going to revamp it more. We do research through this. We've gotten multiple papers published. We're now going to study this disease, for example. We study all the different types of vasculitis, but we're actually adding even more to this disease. And we're working on that, plus the VCRC, which I run as well. And so this is a way for you to do active research. What we're doing is, I know, hard to imagine, we're actually asking patients how they feel. What do you think's going on? And that's what this is about, is following patients, and they report what their disease is like. Like Dr. Gordon said, as Dr. Gordon said earlier today, you're part of the process. You're part of the research. So I urge you to think about joining. I have an ulterior motive, but I think you'll enjoy it. What about polyarteritis nodosa? Very rare these days, but a troubling disease. This is an interesting thing that came out a few years ago, but I don't think we've reported it here so much. This, and we've seen more of this, and we just did some new work on this. This was a couple of families who had a genetic disorder that caused, unfortunately, young people to have strokes and various other problems. And it looked like PAN. And many of them were told they have PAN or PAN, polyarteritis nodosa vasculitis. And what they have is a particular genetic disorder. And our group, our VCRC, we have the largest collection of patients with PAN. We have actually done this genetic testing with Dr. Kastner at NIH. And they have found that several percentage of patients, 4 or so, but it's still 4 or 5% of patients that we thought, and we're experts at PAN, really have a genetic disease that actually should be treated differently. So we're beginning to learn through all the genetic work being done in the world about subsets of disease, and what we're calling X may be really 3 different diseases or more. And so we're learning more about how to divide people up and treat them more precisely. So this is very, very interesting work, and it's going to change those people's lives, and we're going to learn more about the genetics and help. I don't think it's all genetics, obviously not. Our diseases don't run in families that strongly, but there's a strong component that makes you more likely to get a disease or not. There may be genes that make you more likely to respond to a drug or not, etc. This is an example of how pretty complicated, somewhat esoteric research can lead to actual patient benefit. So what about Takayasu's and giant cell arteritis? Well, I'm running out of time. Let's go to a timeline again. This timeline's a little different. First of all, it doesn't start in 1977. It starts in 1998, which tells you something. It's harder to do research in these diseases. They're rare for a variety of reasons. And it took 20 years before they began to catch up in doing these randomized trials. But we're a stubborn and persistent bunch of investigators. And so in giant cell arteritis, disease of people usually 60 and older, often especially 70 or even 80 and older, and it's a vasculitis. This disease, there was some couple of different trials of methotrexate with some mixed results, and most of us feel that it is beneficial in some patients. Those were randomized trials, and that was in the 90s and the early aughts. And then there were some trials of IV prednisone, IV methylprednisolone, and it would have benefited from vision. And then the magic green stripe comes along. It's not green by accident, representing money, specifically generally your tax dollars in terms of NIH and FDA and other funding. Thank you for that. Is to allow us to do even better research, and also some companies. Then there was a couple of trials with companies and various things of anti-TNF. We showed pretty convincingly that didn't work. That was actually very helpful because we stopped using those drugs and we could look for new things. And that's actually pretty important. And then there was the first trial with tocilizumab, and it was positive by a group in Switzerland. And then there was the big trial, then our big trial moderately big trial of abatacept. I'll show you that in a second. That was the first multi-center trial published with Biologics. And then there was a trial of tocilizumab. This was the most important trial, led to the approval of a drug for giant cell arteritis. Tocilizumab, also known as Actemra. And that was just in 2018. So again, that happened right around the time of the last workshop. But now, look at what's going on. There are 4 different industry, one of them was already stopped and it's not going to be completed, but there are several industry-sponsored trials in giant cell arteritis. And the Vasculitis Clinical Research Consortium is doing a trial called Abigard, looking at abatacept, a follow-up trial to try to get even more evidence to get it approved. And that'll be starting very soon. I had 3 phone calls from the airport about this today. We're close to that. So what about Takayasu's arteritis? Young people, mostly women, but not only women. Men and women, young, they often, when they get it, they lose pulses, they have blockages of the arteries. Wow. When was the first trial? 2017. Our group did it, the Vasculitis Clinical Research Consortium, using a drug. It was a negative trial, but it tells us, okay, don't use that drug. And it says, wow, we can do these trials, even though this is a really rare and complicated disease. We get together, we can do this trial. There was another trial done in Japan that was kind of unclear about benefit, and that, but it's been very helpful, and we're hopefully trying to launch a couple of them are being launched in China, actually working with some investigators in China. They have, it's a rare disease, but when you have 1.3 billion people, you have a lot of everything. And so they're doing trials as well, and it's a different climate. So we work together and try to advise and move that along. And we're trying to get another trial up and running. But again, look at what's happening now in these 2 forms of large vessel vasculitis. Look at all this exciting work that's happening. Some of it's going to be successful, some of it's not. But I can tell you, as we've moved to the right, they're bigger and they're better trials. And that's what we need. Okay, this is the tocilizumab study. This is showing that they had 4 different dosing groups. It's very complicated, but it showed you don't want to be in the yellow line. You want to be in the top lines, which got the drug. Less likely to flare, save some prednisone. There's a whole zone about how much prednisone you change, but it's a separate issue. Interestingly, nobody got visual loss, which is the big thing you worry about, is going blind. Thankfully, nobody in any group, they got only prednisone, this and that did, showing you that once you're under good care, good things generally happen. So, based on these 2 trials, this drug was approved by the FDA and many other countries. And again, first drug approved for GCA. So in the last several years, 3 drugs for 3 different forms of vasculitis have been approved and are now available for your use. I want to show you, this was our study. Carol and I did this. Carol Langford, she'll be here later today. This was a trial through the Vasculitis Clinical Research Consortium of abatacept, another biologic agent. And again, we showed a nice, important difference between the treatment group and the non-treatment group. We're going to follow this up with another trial in order to get this approved. So, that was the first one. So, next steps are a larger trial. I want to remind you that all of you have been, to my knowledge, born at one point in life, and therefore you were probably the result of a pregnancy. And it is our hope for all of our patients that if they want to get pregnant, that they can, we can have that happen for women with vasculitis. But what we don't know enough of is what happens to the woman, what happens to her vasculitis during pregnancy. Pregnancy, lots of things happen during pregnancy physiologically, and that can affect autoimmune diseases. And if you have vasculitis, what does it do to the developing fetus and baby? And so this is a registry that we're running. Women, just sign up yourself during pregnancy. There's one piece of paper the doctor has to fill out, and it's so easy. So easy, even a doctor can fill it out. And involves checking things. Excellent. And we're trying to get a bigger and bigger group of women who've had various forms of vasculitis to give us data so we can learn about this, because this is a very important topic. We need data, and so we want people to do that. You just join online. We're actually getting it translated. We had already translated. Caitlin, we got it translated from investigators around the world. They're translating it for us. I think we already have Italian, Portuguese, Spanish, Turkish, Japanese is working on French and German, and we're trying to launch it more. Because people who don't speak English also get pregnant. And so we would like to, as a matter of fact, the majority of people in the world who get pregnant do not speak English. And so we'd like to get everybody in. I want to thank, you got to thank the money, but I do want to thank the money, because without the NIH, without the FDA, without various companies, and without other governments, we can't do this research. And without the Vasculitis Foundation, which provides some of the seed money for some of these trials as well, some of the studies I've described, are partnering with the Vasculitis Foundation. Often those grants get some new ideas, you get some evidence, and you apply for bigger ones. They are very important projects. And I'm happy to take questions if you have any now, otherwise I can stop. But I'm finishing on time. I didn't think I was too fast. And I thank you very much for your attention. The answer to the first question is no, you cannot have my Oreos. So the question is there any precision medicine? You're stealing my entire last talk. No, is there any precision medicine work being done in GPA? So yes. So in fact, it depends how you define precision medicine. Precision medicine is defined a variety of ways. When we're really talking about precision medicine, we're really talking about looking at individual characteristics for patients. It's also called personalized medicine. Look at the patient, say, okay, what's your genotype? What else do you have? What's this marker and that marker? We'll give you this treatment and not that treatment. I sort of talked about precision. I meant precision therapy, so targeted therapy. So I would separate those two. The targeted therapy, saying let's go after this chemical versus that, is absolutely being done in all the diseases. So the Avacopan study I told you about, that anti-C5a, that's a targeted therapy. Precision medicine, where we look at your genotype or look at other antibodies and things, we're not where cancer is. Oncology have really amazing, some of their studies, and they can genotype a tumor and say you should get this. But we're already doing precision medicine. If you're anti-PR3 versus MPO, we do something different. If you're older or younger, if this is your first time or second time, if you've got cryo plus hepatitis versus not. So there's lots of ways we individualize the treatment that you're getting. But we want to take it to a higher level of combining maybe a genetic marker, maybe an antibody marker in your blood, maybe your personal history of what came when, old, young, male, female, what have you. And so the answer is yes, we're doing targeted therapies in multiple different diseases, and yes, we're working towards precision medicine, but it takes time. But we're definitely getting there, and we're doing it. So this is a very commonly asked question. Is there any studies being done on the effect of diet? So I'll start by telling you, what diet should you be on? That's careful. No, I think you should be on a low-fat, low-cholesterol, high-fiber, non-American diet that allows you to maintain your weight and good for heart disease. Doing diet studies are very, very difficult. Because there's so many variables and people cheat and people get this and that, and there's all sorts of stuff in food. We are interested in certain diets that may reduce inflammation or may change things. So there are people trying to do this in autoimmune diseases. I think we wait and see. I will tell you this. Be careful of false advertising or overly hyped things about diet and diet supplements. People say, oh, you want this diet because it's going to boost your immune system. I'm not so sure. If I had a disease where my immune system was attacking me and causing inflammation, I want it boosted. And then they say, oh, take this drug, it'll lower your immune system. Well, let's do that with some balance. And so I'm not knocking all diet supplements because obviously we've changed it. I will tell you this about, I think when we really know, we advise it. And when we don't, we need to do trials. But they're hard to do. And so that's not a satisfactory answer, but that is the answer. In terms of alternative medicines and supplements, I'll just go on and say that, I'm a traditional physician, but I will tell you, as I say, alternative medicines, they're alternative until we prove they work. And then we call them medicine. So be careful about the next wonder thing, because I don't know of any drug ever that has benefit that also doesn't have some harm. Everything with too much and in wrong combination causes issues. So I would be cautious about alternative and various supplements.
The VCCR study for the US and Canada, do you have a counterpart in Europe?
For the VCR, for many of the studies. So the Vasculitis Clinical Research Consortium, we sponsored the Pexavas study and the Abrega. So we are doing trials in collaboration with European, Asian colleagues. Many of our trials are international. Some of the studies are only U.S. and Canada because of the funding, but that's changing as well. So we have a great collaborative process across the world. And for example, the Vasculitis Patient-Powered Research Network, anybody in the world who has a computer or a nice phone can join. In the back, that lady right there. Yeah, so I'm going to caution you a moment. I'm not going to pick on you to avoid overly personal questions about your own cases, but I'm not so sure vitamin K is great for all vascular health and all that. I mean, I think, again, it's sort of, you want to have a balanced diet and nutrient. Very few Americans are vitamin deficient in general. A multivitamin a day is probably fine, but for you, maybe not, because you don't want the vitamin K. So that's a particular situation, and you talk to your physician about that. I don't think you're missing out on the magic bullet. So there's been lots of research on vitamin K in various modalities. Again, it's hard. There's two types of research with diet generally. There's looking at big studies of how people eat across, trying to get surveys of many, many people. That can be problematic. And then there's actually doing a trial where you give people X or Y. But first of all, most of these diet things may be relatively small changes, which may be important, but if you need years to do it and you need thousands and thousands of patients, you can imagine difficult to do and expensive to do. But I agree that we should do more about these things to prove things. And there have been some big diet studies that have been helpful either in saying yes or no about diet things, right there. So the question is, what is the latest research on duration and dosage for maintaining continued use of rituximab for maintaining remission in GPA or MPA? So this is the single most common question I get from other physicians every day. They email me around the world. That is what that rituximab trial that we're running will actually help address. The French study already gave us a pretty good answer that you give it every 6 months, 500, it does well, and that dose has been approved by the FDA for maintenance. Our trial will give some additional information about B cells and whether or not markers and who to do it. I think that the standard of care these days is it depends on the patient. There's a lot of individual factors. If you've regularly relapsed, most of us who see a lot of these patients are going to keep you on rituximab probably every 6 months, some would argue different pattern, and dose for a long time. The question becomes, can you stop it? And should you stop it? And that's what we're trying to learn with these studies. In that trial I told you about, we stopped it after 2 years. So we'll get a sense of who flares and who doesn't. So I think these questions are happy questions. These are questions meaning we have done well enough to start asking those questions. Not, am I going to survive? Can I get into remission? It's, how do I stay healthy? How do I stay going? I'm not saying it's all rosy, but it's a good question. In the back, in the hat. So the question is there any research into microbiome, the gut biome? So the microbiome, I've got bad news for all of you. You are full of bugs. In your nose, in your mouth, in your ear, all over your skin, and especially in your GI system. Most of stool is actually dead bugs and other good stuff, and there's a lot not so dead. And we live very happily with millions of organisms. They help us. They help run the immune system. And so the microbiome is that community of bugs. So Dr. Rennie Ree, who's in here with a faculty member with me at the University of Pennsylvania, she'll be speaking tomorrow. I'm not sure about that, but her research grant from the NIH is on gut microbiome, not gut microbiome, a nasal microbiome in GPA. Dr. Najim also working with us, and Dr. Ree also doing work on the gut microbiome. So the answer is we're very interested in how does the immune system in your gut and the bugs and in your nose interplay to change the immune system. However, that does not mean you should go out and buy a probiotic or buy some special yogurt that's going to change your life. Because if the microbiome affects your disease, the question is how? Is adding to it good? Is changing it good? So that's the kind of thing we need to figure out. But yes, it's a very interesting. We're not alone in vasculitis in looking at this. You know, psoriasis and rheumatoid arthritis and multiple sclerosis are all looking at the interplay of the microbiome. So it's a good question, but it's one that probably couldn't have been answered even 10 years ago because the technology to do it has really changed and allowed us to do it. Okay, so there's a good question. So the question Mr. Stewart is asking is, what about low-dose prednisone? So the perhaps dirty little secret of vasculitis is that lots of patients have to be maintained on a low dose of prednisone for a variety of reasons, including when they come off, the adrenal gland is not as happy. I think that is actually the least likely reason because I think that's overstated. Everybody's adrenal gland is suppressed if you give them enough prednisone. If they come off, most people will bounce back over time. But what happens is people come off and it doesn't, whichever disease you have, some of it comes back. The fatigue is too bad. The joints start hurting. The nose starts running. You have a little cough. Your asthma gets worse. And so you need to be maintained at 5 or 7.5 and sometimes more, which is where it gets. Is 5 forever bad? Maybe. Dr. Michael George in our division, I like to promote my own faculty, but it's actually true. They're doing all this wonderful work. I was actually looking at this in patients with rheumatoid arthritis, for example. Is long-term not so good for you? Well, it's probably better than having active disease all the time. So the question is, can you come off? There's a big difference between being on 15 and being on 5. But it would be nice to be on 0. So the answer is, does it do harm? Maybe. Is it helping you? Probably. And so is it preventing big things from happening? We're not sure. One of the many trials I talked to you about is the taper trial we're running through VCRC, looking at that question. Everybody goes to 5 and they get randomized to 0 or stay on 5, and we see what happens. And there's another trial now being done in France, similarly looking at that question. So it's not just about the big doses, the small doses. But remember, before we get rid of stuff that works, let's find an alternative strategy that also works. So we have to be careful. We do a lot of, I want to ask how many people in the room have, shall I say, experimented with their prednisone dose. But it's a lot. And I understand that totally. And so I think people try to find that happy point where it works. So we are interested in that. That's a very good research question. Again, a happy research question because it means someone's doing okay. What's not happy is being on, 15, 20, or if you have to 3 or 4 or 5 times a year get a burst for a while, come down because that adds up. So we're aware of all that. These are questions that matter. When we ask our patients what their number one concerns are, what should we be looking at? Prednisone rises way up there. Fatigue, we haven't forgotten about fatigue. We haven't forgotten about a lot of these things we know are important. All right, I'm getting the big and beady from the general over there. So I'm going to stop, and thanks again, and I'm around all weekend.